Good evening, everybody, and welcome in to our event tonight. So happy to have you here. I'm your host, Dan Strafford, part of the digital media team here at Kaplan Test Prep. On tonight's show, we'll be taking a look at how to pay less and get more out of college. To do just that, we have a great guest on the line with us. Couldn't be happier to have Sabrina Manville here with us, co-founder of Edmit. Find them at edmit.me. Sabrina is a former AVP at Southern New Hampshire University. Sabrina, thanks so much for joining us here tonight.
Thanks, Dan. Excited to be here.
We have so much to talk about as you look over Sabrina's bio a little bit there. I do want to take this time, though, to point out that we will be taking questions. You should see chat off to the right. We have Nicole, who is a representative of Kaplan Test Prep. She'll be answering some questions live there, but we'll also be taking them. But I do want to point out, one, we're going to try to take those questions at the end of the show. So about 15 minutes left, about 8:45 on the East Coast, and subsequently later or earlier each zone you go to the West. But what we're going to focus on is broader topics. We know all of you out there have very specific topic questions about your children or yourself and paying for college and how to afford it and how to make sure you're getting the best value out of it. We won't be able to do those tonight, but we do suggest head over to edmit.me, ask Sabrina, ask her team over there. Of course, check out captest.com for anything Kaplan has available for you. Now, Sabrina, we have a lot to get to here tonight. I want to make sure we have tons of time to get through it all and that we do our best to discuss all the different topics that are out there. But a brief overview, if you could. What is edmit.me and why are we here tonight to talk to those who are viewing on YouTube?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. Edmit's mission is to help families make smart decisions about college. We believe that higher education is an investment and should be thought of that way. It's one of the largest purchases that we make in our lifetimes, one of the big things we save for our children. And so we believe that you should evaluate your college decision the same way you think about other large purchases, with really great data, but also good personal recommendations that help you make sense of that data. So Edmit provides tuition and financial aid estimates for different schools and different tools that help you project your costs and outcomes to help you reach your goals at different stages of the process.
We would love to hear from everybody as well, where you're watching from. And if you're a parent, what year your student is in. We'd love to hear that in chat. So if you feel free now to type that into chat, we'd love to take that into consideration as we're discussing topics here tonight. We'd also love to know where you're watching from, where in the United States, maybe some people from Canada tuning in as well. Where are you watching from and what's your focal point here? Why have you joined us here on this webcast? We're going to take sort of a very methodical approach to this, make sure we give Sabrina as much time as necessary to bring her expertise to the fold here, but also do want to get your questions, so feel free to put them in. Edmit covers four-year colleges, right? Just to confirm what your product does, and you're covering all four-year colleges at present, right?
Yep, right now we have data on all four-year colleges in the US.
Fantastic. And so if you want, you can check it out later on, edmit.me, and we'll have links throughout our discussion here tonight as well, pointing to some content that we'll be discussing, but also edmit.me content, but also Kaplan test prep content as well. So when we prepped for this, Sabrina, we talked a lot about value, a lot about getting, I mean, the best bang for your buck is a phrase that we all hear around buying a car, buying a house. But for a while, that wasn't the way we discussed college. The idea of debt in college didn't really have the same discussion we had around buying a car or buying a home or other purchases you may make. You already made mention of that. College debt has changed a lot, right? We've changed the way we're paying for school and the way we go about paying for this high cost and, high return thing. But how has it changed? How has the environment changed for paying for college and the debt that's involved with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we probably have a lot of parents on the line, and you won't recognize the process compared to what you went through when you went to school. I think everyone realizes college is much more expensive. It used to be possible to really work your way through college. That was kind of something that, if you worked hard with, a regular wage job, you could pay your way with minimal debt or even no debt for most schools in the US. That's just not true anymore based on the economics. And so for the average family, it's a larger share of the income and kind of a bigger pool of savings that you're going to have to accumulate in order to meet the tuition that schools cost today. That said, college is still one of the best investments you can make in the US in terms of kind of economic mobility and salary growth, and professional opportunities down the line. And the data still bears that out. I think there's a lot of questions about, is college worth it? The answer is overwhelmingly on average, yes. But it's just that it's an average. And so that return on investment is different for every student and every school. And that's what makes these calculations so difficult. So that's one of the things that Edmit helps you do, and kind of what I'm passionate about is helping you figure out how do you maximize that investment, because the cost is different everywhere you look and everywhere you apply.
So it's an accurate statement to make that every individual student's experience and situation is completely different.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you'll see, like, as we talk about kind of different schools, that even schools that look very similar on paper are often approaching their pricing and kind of financial aid in different ways. And so it's really hard when you're getting started to necessarily tease all those things out. So I'd love to share some tips about that.
Absolutely. Hello to Helen Lee. She's watching in Los Angeles, a mother of an 11th grader. You have Lauren Weber, parent of a junior in Columbus, Ohio. From South Carolina, that's Janine Zhao. Son is a rising senior. Cindy Dabb is in North Carolina. We have a parent in New York City of a rising senior, Carol Totoro. Gabe, guys, thanks so much for checking in here. Lots of people, and a graphically diverse crowd here too. How much that's part of the equation, right? Where you are, what the school is, how all these factors come together. Maybe at the top here, what are some of those factors that you find parents don't consider off the bat? Like when they're first starting to rising junior, rising sophomore even, what are some of those factors that you'd love to put in the brains of the parents watching here that maybe they might not otherwise think of first?
Yeah. Well, one of the first that comes to mind that I think is often surprising, because you mentioned geography, is that public versus private is not always cheap versus expensive. And that's particularly true if you're applying out of state to a public school. Out of state students tend to have less financial aid awarded to them at a public institution than they might get at a private school. And so there's actually a lot of opportunities for tuition discounts or financial aid at private institutions and smaller schools, which a lot of people don't realize. The average discount rate, or the average kind of net price, which we'll talk about, for private schools is nearly 50%. Today in America. So if you look at the tuition pricing on a private school's website, chances are that the average student is getting almost half off that.
Do you deal a lot with sticker shock? It sounds like that's sort of the road you're going down there, that the private institution has this gigantic number, but in the end, talking about value, it's a vastly different equation.
Yeah, and we hear that from schools all the time, because it's hard for them because very few students really pay that full price. And so different schools have different approaches to that sticker shock problem. But one of the things we want to do is to educate people that there's often a lot of ways to get financial aid from schools so that you're not paying full price, no matter your income level or your merit. There's opportunities for every student to find financial aid packages that work for them.
One thing I do want to point out, Sabrina, just to clarify, we're not going to talk much about FAFSA tonight. We may define it as a function, but we're not going to talk about the process by which getting federal aid, correct?
Right. I mean, so yeah, we won't talk about the intricacies of FAFSA. I would just say that it's a very important step in the process because it spits out what's known as your expected family contribution. And that's the number that the government kind of estimates your family can contribute to college. And so colleges will look at that number to decide what your financial aid package looks like. And so we always recommend, even if you think you're too wealthy for financial aid, it's really important to do the FAFSA and do it early because many schools require it no matter what your financial situation in order to get any type of package. And so that's kind of the headline, is to get on that form because it's really important. It's a really important step in the process.
All right, I do want to define some topics and some specific terms. We'll do that in a couple of minutes, but I do want to take a step back to the narrative around college, the narrative around college debt, grad school versus college and universities, and how it's portrayed both in movies and media and in talks like these. How do you take it right now? What do you think the narrative is around debt, investment value of a college education?
Yeah, I mentioned that a little bit before, that there's some kind of question marks I see in the media about whether college is worth it. And certainly there's a lot of vocational career paths that don't require an undergraduate degree that can be fruitful and high reward for the people that go down them. That said, the data overwhelmingly shows that an undergraduate degree is most often a good investment. And so when you look at the student debt numbers that are often portrayed in the media, a lot of that student debt is actually coming from graduate school. And so I guess it's back to that statement that the investment is not equal for everyone, or the return on investment is not equal for everyone, but you don't need to be scared about taking a little bit of debt for college, because at least at the undergraduate level, there's a level of debt that's responsible because of the return that you get in your salary and kind of employment opportunities. And more, new jobs that are being created overwhelmingly require a bachelor's degree. And that trend has kind of continued and will likely continue. I believe that, some people disagree, but that's what I believe.
Well, there's some great information in there, and just the idea that the numbers still bear out that college is a wise investment. But we're here to talk about that investment, about getting the right value out of it. If you look at it, and if parents look at it as, I'm putting a certain amount of money in, or a child taking the aid or the grants, or it might be scholarships, or it might be loans, I'm expecting to get Y out of it when all is said and done, is not something I did. Is not something I did when I went to college. I have three girls who hopefully one day will go if they choose. And I know I have to start saving. I've been a little slow in that process, but we'll maybe get to that a little later on. Anything else for parents in understanding the comparison shopping, or how a mindset should be heading into this comparison shopping? We're going to define some terms in a moment, so we'll get to that. But any other tips or tricks here at the top to sort of get our mind straight for what we're going to talk about the rest of the hour?
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot. I mean, if you think about kind of the college admissions process and all the messaging you get from your high schools and your counselors, often it's really focused on where am I going to get in and how do I get in? And I would advocate adding in the component of how am I going to pay for it, or what's it going to cost me? We see that, if you have a list of schools, some of which are your kind of reach schools and safety schools, we should have this similar approach to thinking about the cost of those colleges. So there's colleges where you're much more likely to get, a good financial aid package, and some that you might not. And so you should think about balancing the portfolio in the same way that you think about balancing where you might or may not get in.
So if I think about it, it's almost maybe geeking out a little bit here, but it's almost a 2x2, where you have cost or expensive and not so expensive, and reach from an academics perspective, and more of a safety school, what's typically been called. And then you mix and match, right? You try to find the one that's in the upper left of that quadrant to see what is the best value, but also the best academics.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to minimize the kind of emotional or softer considerations around fit, because obviously, the type of campus, the type of educational experience, the geography of a school, those are all really important factors as well. But the quantitative numbers are vital as well.
Right. And I don't want to diminish in any way culture on campus, proximity to home, all of those other things that can come into a decision. I went 15 minutes from home. It worked out very well for me. I now work for a great company, so it's worked out in my career path. But it is a very large decision, and we want to try to make it a little easier for you here. So Sabrina, if you're ready, I would love to define some of these terms that we're going to be using for the rest of the night. I will share your PowerPoint slides, I think, help illustrate them. But we're going to go through quickly here. If you have any extra questions, one, you can always scrub back. you know, scroll back and look at the video, but feel free to ask them in chat. We can clarify anything a little bit further for you that you may not be quite specific on. But here are those slides if you could take us through these topics that we want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these are kind of the highest priority terms that I think everyone should start with. I would say we have some links that we'll share where you can kind of come into Edmit's blog. We have a couple of kind of financial aid 101 posts and resources that would be helpful if you're just getting started on the process. So starting with list price, this is kind of the easy one. It's the price that's listed on the college website for tuition or other fees that they have. And as we've talked about, the vast majority of students do not pay list price. And that's particularly true at private institutions. So what the student actually pays is called the net price. And that's the list price minus whatever help you're receiving from the school in the form of financial aid and scholarships. The cost of attendance is the term that includes everything. So tuition, as well as fees, room and board, books. It's something colleges are required to publish and kind of estimate for students so that they don't so they're not going in blind, just looking at the tuition cost. Often, obviously, these other expenses could almost double the cost of attending the school. So that's really the pool of money that you'll need in a given year for a school. The second column here are the ways that you can pay for school kind of at a high level. Obviously, loans. We've talked a lot about student debt already, and those can be federal loans, those can be subsidized by the government, or they can be private. And so sometimes a financial aid package would include some of those federal loans, but often families would have to supplement with loans from a private bank or financial institution. Grants and scholarships, that's the big kind of topic for today. That's financial aid. And that money is what we think of as free money. You don't have to pay it back, unlike a loan. And the school awards these based on a lot of different factors. So everyone knows that your financial situation in many cases dictates your financial aid package. So that's called need-based financial aid. And that's so poorer students would get more money from the school to help them attend. There's also merit-based scholarships, and that's money that's kind of regardless of your financial situation, based on the academic record or other characteristics that the student has, whether it's academic strength or athletic ability or other specialties that the student has demonstrated. And those can be just kind of dean scholarships that the school gives kind of in general to students, or they could be named something that an endowed scholarship that the school has. And here I'm talking about grants and scholarships from the institution. There's also obviously private money that you can get from other sources to kind of supplement. We can talk about that. And last is work study. This is when a student has a job on campus and can use the income from that job to pay for school. The last column is the kind of government side of things. We talked a little bit about FAFSA. That's the application for financial aid that the government hosts. There's also one called CSS Profile. Those are two kind of forms and applications that you fill out depending on the school but most schools are the FAFSA, and you fill that out to kind of define your family's financial situation. And then the expected family contribution is what's spit out by the FAFSA, as I said, and that is the estimate of the amount that your family could contribute to the cost of college. That's obviously based on a formula, and a lot of times that number comes back and sounds way too high for families. So but it is what's used kind of in the formulas, and so it's important to know it, even if it's not actually realistic for your family at the time of application.
A question did come in on the FAFSA, and I believe this is one you can answer. Feel free to say you'd rather pass on it because it's not your area of expertise. I think I know the answer, but we'll read it. Does your parents' income determine your qualification for FAFSA? The correct answer is it's part of what determines your qualification.
Yeah. So income as well as assets are both taken into account on the FAFSA. And so Yes, the answer is yes. And there's kind of complexities depending on the parents' marital situation and the students. So if the student is a dependent, the parent's income is defined on the FAFSA. If you're an independent student, your parents aren't counted. But I'm assuming you're asking a bit about a dependent student.
Yeah, dependent student, typical family situation. There are many ways that can go. And we do have a previous webinar that is up on our YouTube page that you guys can seek out later that talks a bit more specifically about FAFSA. So that we'll share that link later on that will help you understand that. Still good. It's from last year, but really dives more into that side of the house. What Sabrina's here to talk about, as she said, a little bit different tonight, but I appreciate you taking that question anyway. We do have a question here about net price. That we're probably going to answer a little bit later on, but I think it's at least worthwhile to get it out of the way now. Once you get accepted to a college and they tell you your net price, can you negotiate, or is that frowned upon?
So yes, you can. And how you do that and how realistic it is depends on your situation and the school. But absolutely, that's typically called a financial aid appeal. And what it means is that you go back to the school and basically say, either my financial situation has changed, or my financial situation makes this untenable for me, or I'm considering another school with a different price point, and so, is there any way to move the needle? And so there's kind of a range of ways you can appeal your financial aid award. That's something that actually Edmit works with families to do, and our data can help you figure out how realistic it is and how to do it. We actually save families on average $5,600 compared to their initial award. So the answer is yes, there's definitely room for negotiation, although how and how much depends on the situation.
Now, something we can dive into is you do have some comparisons between schools, similar type schools or similar by name, that maybe people wouldn't understand or believe to be differences here. One thing I want to clarify that about scholarships, about aid, that's a yearly process, right? Scholarships, aid, FAFSA, all those things aren't to be taken as, oh, I got this my freshman year, I'm good, I'm going to get that the next 3 years, 4 years. I went 5 years, whatever number of years you're there, right?
Absolutely. So there are sometimes you'll receive a scholarship, which is, renewable for all 4 years. But financial, like need-based scholarships you need to be renewed every year. So if your financial situation changes, your aid could change. And also a lot of scholarships are dependent on your grades, or may have other strings attached, like how many credits you're taking, or you need to be working, or there's different requirements to keep getting the money. And so I would urge people to really think all 4 years when they get that letter, and kind of read the fine print to understand what money is kind of guaranteed all 4 years and what might go away if things change.
A question here again about student loan, but I do think it sort of is the larger, broader topic we're talking about, where talking about value, talking about debt. I think there's some confusion around who takes on the debt, who takes on the loans, who's signing certain things. Every situation is different, right? So depending on what exactly the transaction is, a student's name may be on it or a parent's name may be on it. Question here is, one of the viewers' son is only 17 years old. Does that affect any of this process, being he's technically under 18 and thus a minor still, or is it just you're entering into the agreement when you enter college?
Yeah, I actually don't want to speak out of turn on that, because the terms of loans are complex and might vary. I would say that in many cases, private loans require a parent guarantor. And I'm not sure about the requirements, the age requirements for federal loans. So I would love to, if this person wants to contact me offline, I'd be happy to look into it and get back to them. My email will be shared at the end of the
I was just about to say that they call that a tease in the business. So, or you can head to edmit.me. Sabrina, one of the co-founders, is prominently displayed over there, so you can find out her information that way. Great. And I think we're well into the discussion thus far. We've shared some of your links in chat. Hopefully everybody's starting to digest those as well. Anything, again, from sort of top level, what parents need to know that you want to share before we get into sort of the college comparison and the X versus Y debate that might come from specific college comparisons?
Yeah, well, I think it would be good to dig into that, because I think another headline would be that even colleges that look similar on paper might be very different in terms of price. And so what's really important is to try to figure out, when you're thinking about how to pay for college, how, how is the college financial aid kind of allocated, and does that benefit you in particular? So so Danny put up this slide. These are just some examples of the, colleges that I'm familiar with, and they all kind of have a slightly different flavor. So the first example is something called preferential packaging. And that simply means that they're using price to attract the students that they want. So this is Muhlenberg College. In that situation, they're not necessarily looking only at financial situations. So there's plenty of merit money available. And so the most attractive students are getting better packages, right? Drew University did something called a tuition reset, and that was in response to this idea of sticker shock that Dan mentioned. They actually, looked at their tuition pricing that's on their website and said, you know what, no one pays this anyway, so let's lower the price so that it's something that's more realistic and more appealing to the average student. And so they cut the price, and they're, so that the price looks more like what people were actually paying before. That might mean that the financial aid package looks smaller, but the net price is probably comparable. So Brown, obviously Ivy League, prestigious school, very selective school. These schools tend to have big endowments, and therefore a lot of money to allocate to financial aid. They tend to not do merit money. And so they're really using their financial aid dollars to help students from lower income backgrounds to pay for school. And they have a no loan policy where they say, if you get into Brown, you won't take any student loans and we'll meet all your need. So that's obviously, that's pretty similar to other schools kind of in that tier. And then the last, Simpson College, this is a great little liberal arts school in Iowa. They actually give scholarships to 100% of their students. And that's based on merit as well as need. And they are very transparent about it on their website. They actually have levels of, grades. And I think it's based on grades and standardized test scores. And so you kind of know going in that, where your pricing would be. So these are all kind of different ways that schools are communicating about their price. And it kind of demonstrates how complex this can be because it is truly different school by school.
Great information here. How do parents digest this? Like, how do they go about? These aren't the 4 colleges I assume many of the viewers are going to be applying to.
Yeah.
Is this Edmit software that can help them piece this all together? Are there other resources that you point them to, or is it just the due diligence of maybe an old school Excel spreadsheet and copy and pasting some cells in?
Yeah, well, certainly you can do the Excel spreadsheet, and there's a ton of different sources out there. This is why Edmit was founded. So what we've done is we take data from the government, because schools are required to report certain pricing and financial aid information to the government. We have private data that we license from partners. We actually have data from students themselves about financial aid packages they received. And so we're ingesting a lot of different sources of data to kind of help make sense of all these differences. And what our software can do is to project actually and estimate what your financial aid package could look like from different schools based on what we know about those policies, like we shared on the last slide, and also what people like you have actually received.
Fantastic. And I think there's just so much information out there, whether an Edmit or another company, or just finding these resources online, or a key component now, really getting all the information you can. Sort of, again, that car buying analogy. You don't just go buy a car off the lot and drive it home. You test drive it, you figure it out, you do the safety tests. Seems like we're still learning to do that here with college, and really understanding the value of it.
And
What
there's a lot of data out there that's, a lot of it is publicly available. The problem is that it's very diffuse and kind of found in a lot of different places. And colleges, to be honest, I've worked with colleges. I love universities and I like want them to survive and thrive. But they also, they benefit from the lack of transparency that exists right now in the market because, you know, parents and students are kind of going in blind, and it's the only purchase that you're kind of applying for the right to make the purchase and you don't know what the price is going to be until way after you get in. So we're trying to change that with Edmit, and hopefully helping a little bit tonight to demystify some of this.
I think so. I would ask you this off of that comment. You made the point before about the financial aid appeal process, right? Where you could say, hey, you offered me this, and now I need a little bit more. Is that possible?
Yeah.
How far down the road can we get with that? Like, is there a problem with stringing a college along? Sounds like poor phrasing, but is that frowned upon? Is it, are you expected to accept at a certain time and maybe a college may move on from you? How does a person navigate that sort of negotiation process?
Yeah. So, well, first, once you get in, you're in, and the college can't rescind the offer. And so there's kind of no harm in asking because the downside is that they say no. What I would say though is that the strength of your appeal is based on kind of the genuineness of it and the honesty. So I would always recommend that people appeal only to schools that they really want to go to. So don't send like 10 financial aid appeals. Often the strongest appeal will be someone saying, I'm really committed to coming if this appeal is met, because you are my top choice. And actually following through on that kind of helps you and also helps kind of students that go after you. So I would say it's always, it's worth doing. There's little downside, and it's usually done after you have already been accepted. So you kind of have the power now, right? You're kind of making your decision, and usually kind of the period ends once you've accepted the offer and kind of sent in your deposit. It becomes a lot harder after that point to kind of negotiate your package because you've basically committed to paying the price by paying your deposit.
It's a great piece of advice, and I think one that should echo with parents of, hey, it never hurts to ask. The answer may be no. I may say no to what you're asking to stay up
Yeah.
past your curfew or your bedtime. But hey, if you ask politely, I will give you an honest answer. And this dovetails into another question we were asked of, how important is it to be honest about changing situations? Somebody in chat asked about, maybe my financial data changed because I lost a job or,
Yeah.
something happened to my child. That seems like honesty is the best policy and sharing is better here, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think to your point earlier, like you're asking nicely, you're doing it kind of in the spirit of telling the truth about your situation. And that's that's the reason that the financial appeals process exists. Colleges are, they're trying to make money, but they want to enroll your student. And so there's actually big teams of people in the financial aid office whose goal and job is to listen to what's your financial situation and kind of help you figure out how you're going to pay for school. And so one thing I always tell families too is like, don't be shy, open the kimono a little bit, tell people what's going on in your life, because that's what they're there for. They want to hear the situation and try to see what they can do to help.
And so this all happens after you are admitted, as you were saying, right? Just to
Yeah.
clarify, this is not a process that when you're applying, you're trying to negotiate already the price of the sale. It's after you're admitted and you get your net price of what you'll be paying.
Yes. That's the best time to do it, once you receive your financial aid package, and you're kind of making your decision about school.
Fantastic. Lots of great information here. Want to keep on rolling here. We do have another slide I want to share about the examples. This is your slide, but college affordability profiles. If you wouldn't mind going through this for the audience,
Yeah, sure.
to give them an idea of what this is all about.
So this is just kind of a great deeper dive into how different colleges can look very different. So and this is the type of data that Edmit uses to make recommendations and to create estimates. So here's some colleges on the left. You'll see Muhlenberg again and some other schools. The first column is the number of students that whose expected family contribution is less than the cost of attendance. In other words, they don't have all the funds to pay for the school. So they have some financial need. And you'll see the number is pretty high for most schools. The second column is how many of those schools actually filled that gap with financial aid. So Williams is one of those kind of selective schools we talked about that are committed to meeting full need of the students. But you'll see the other schools look very different. So NYU only met full need for 9% of its students. Case Western was about half. And then the third was, so this is the percent of students that don't have any financial need who received merit. So we talked about how most very selective schools don't give merit aid. Williams does not give merit aid. Case Western gives a little bit. You'll see the average there. NYU gives very little to those students. And Muhlenberg gives it to about a third of the students with no need. And so you can just see how the profiles are very different, where schools kind of think about allocated that money differently.
As we talk through this and see a variety of comparison points, obviously in your line of work, you're seeing a lot of different student profiles come through. I said specifically before, we're not going to talk about, be able to answer specific questions for anybody in the audience, but I was hoping you had, through your experience, some comparison shopping here we could do amongst people you've helped. Obviously not going to share any names or anything like that, but sort of examples of the work you guys are doing and how it's worked out in specific situations.
Yeah. So, so if you think about, so, you know, I think I hear from a lot of families, like, there's no way I'm going to qualify for financial aid. My EFC is too high, and I'm considered, you know, too wealthy to get financial aid. And that's really not true. As we discussed, there are a lot of schools that have money for students that have no need, according to the FAFSA, and that's called merit scholarships. And it's important to realize that means you should be looking for schools where your student kind of stands out on the spectrum. So where your student is like much stronger than, or, you know, stronger than the average at that school, you're more likely to receive merit money. Then you can look at kind of middle class, zip code, a student with kind of average GPA and test scores, and they think, again, like, I'm just a normal kid. I'm not, you know, I'm neither high achieving nor, you know, underserved. And so I'm kind of stuck in the middle with no financial aid options. Again, we really see that there's options for those students where you can look for schools that award merit, again, where the child is bringing something kind of unique or top of range for the school. And often these schools would be private schools, smaller private schools. There's a lot of small private colleges in the US that are kind of struggling to meet their goals for their class size. And so they're actually really excited about, you know, finding students that are, you know, from that, you know, the hardworking student who might not have straight A's, but really wants to attend. And so that might also mean looking kind of outside of your geographic area. And one of the things we have on the site is kind of recommendations of schools that look similar, that you might not have heard of because they're kind of small or more regional, but could be a great fit. And then obviously, students coming from lower income backgrounds, kind of with maybe you know, stronger academic profile, more selective institutions might often have a lot more money for that student than, you know, the average state school who's serving kind of a broad range of students. And so in those cases, like, it's important to kind of reach high and look to those more selective institutions if you haven't considered them, because they do have more money to offer in many cases for students with lower expected family contributions.
This is great information. Appreciate it. There was a question that came in. will I get better financial aid package? And I'm going to expand that to the whole gamut of what can happen if I apply out of state versus in state. We've talked around this. You just went through some of these profiles. Can you talk a little bit about the comparison shopping when it has to do with, your geographical location, state where you are, and maybe looking outside those borders?
Yeah. So it depends, but I guess I do see a lot of people that expected to get some money from public institutions not in their state and didn't. So public institutions are generally looking to out-of-state students to pay closer to full price because they have a mandate to meet the needs of the in-state population and to kind of attract those students. And so they tend to have more money available for in-state students than out of state. So I see a lot of families that kind of get surprised by that. I would say for private schools, if you're looking kind of outside of your geographic region, there's a lot of private schools that want geographic diversity. And so if you're not considering, if you're kind of excited about a school in a different part of the country, that could be a big benefit to your application and kind of make you a desirable candidate because they tend to kind of find students locally, but like want to diversify their class. So you're offering diversity in those cases, and that can lead to, some merit money.
So as we continue this conversation here, I want to talk about shaping the conversation at home. How do parents go about, in your estimation and in the advice you give, how do they start shaping these conversations around cost, value, schools, safety, value, all those words we've talked about? How do parents start shaping this conversation with their rising juniors and seniors?
So I think it's really important, again, kind of think about this kind of the way you'd approach a big purchase, thinking about the resources that you have at your disposal in your household to pay for college. So start from what savings you have, what portion of your income you're willing to spend on tuition through the 4 years, what level of loan you feel comfortable with your student or child taking on, if you have a preference about that, and kind of really set some guardrails and guidelines about kind of what you can really afford. And that's tough to do, again, because you don't always know what package you're going to get and what the price is going to be. But I think starting from what you have to give is the first important step. And then using either Edmit or your own research to really have to really layer that conversation of finances on top of the college list process, so that you feel comfortable that the list of schools that your student is applying to has a couple in there that are kind of within your affordability range that you're pretty comfortable about. Because the worst conversations I've had are conversations with parents that have a list of acceptances and none of the prices meet what they can pay. And that's a really difficult situation, because you can try for appeals, but that's not always possible, right? So that's what I would say. We have a couple of guides on our site that kind of help with like conversation starters, and also some worksheets and things that you can use to start to map out your finances.
Great talking points there. As you said, again, this is such a big purchase and we don't think of it that way all the time. To go into it and have all these schools that you got into and just not be able to make it work has to be such a disheartening thing that you encounter probably more than you'd prefer as you go through this process. Great conversation. We are still taking questions in chat. Feel free to put them through. If we don't get to them, we'll be sure to pass them on to Sabrina, her team over at Edmit. Anything we can answer from a Kaplan test prep perspective, we will be sure to pass along as well. We'll share all of Sabrina's contact information on a slide at the end. You can always come back and view it, or obviously head to edmit.me for more information there. And then we'll share some of Kaplan's social media channels and ways to get in touch with us if need be. Continuing the conversation on trying to understand what. So one of the things we talked about when we met was about private scholarships and the idea of the return on investment there. And I had a story told to me about a mother who had her daughter basically work full-time trying to get private scholarships, like applying to. And it sounded like a great story because she got a ton of money, and that's fantastic. but that does seem like a very small, fine, minuscule amount of people who would have that great an outcome in doing it. How do you view personally, and how does Edmit view personal and private scholarships as opposed
Yeah.
to the entire financial aid process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think this is another one of the biggest misconceptions that I see from families. So just to clarify, we're talking about scholarships that are not given by the schools. They might be given by a local community organization or company, or other sources that are not the college or university that you're applying to. I see this also, that I see a lot of students spending a lot of time applying to these scholarships, many of which might only have like, a few $1,000s for the first year. And obviously those are helpful, but they are just kind of a drop in the bucket when you think about the overall cost of a college education. And so first you just have to apply to a lot of them in order to actually make a dent. And second, they're just becoming more and more competitive because there's these websites where you can get, the database of all the scholarships available. And there's a lot of people just kind of plotting through and applying almost full time, like the person you mentioned. So I think what's important for people to think about is actually schools, like I have talked about, like are giving these big discounts essentially of like up to 50% off their price. And that's a much bigger chunk of money than all the kind of private scholarships that you might receive. So I think a lot of that energy would best be focused on looking at the schools that are kind of trying to attract students like you, and doing so with financial aid. And kind of that's a higher kind of return on investment for your time.
Thanks so much. That makes a ton of sense and a way to go about it. And you keep saying it, and it's just amazing to hear the sort of 50% off. Sounds like a supermarket phrase, but is something that we have to come to terms with, that this is the way it works, and admitting yourself, and there are ways to find this information out. I've applied to 10 colleges. I've gotten in, luckily, to all of them.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should start saying it's my daughter, because she's closer to going to college than I am from graduating it. But she got into 10 colleges. She is lucky to have done that. What do I do now? Like, what am I doing now to figure out where the best aid package is, how the pieces come together? Help me figure this out. What do I do next?
Yeah. So once you get in, and you'll get two kind of types of communication from the school. The first is, yay, congratulations, welcome to the class. And the second is the financial aid details. And the first thing to know is that the financial aid letters are all a little bit different. And this is an area that actually the government has been looking at, and some various foundations and other researchers have found that they can be very confusing because they don't all look the same. And so it's very hard to kind of parse out like apples to apples comparison between the schools. So I think the first thing to do is to really take your letters and to figure out like what's free money, what's loans, what's the bottom line, cost to me of these different schools. And like we talked about, look at all 4 years and make sure you understand how that cost would change over 4 years. Think about whether you might actually need 5 years. That's pretty common actually to need more than 4 years to finish a degree, because you might need to take some time off or take a slightly lower workload one semester. And so really project out, the full cost that you can assume from different schools. And then with that number, you can look at whether a financial aid appeal makes sense for the school that the top couple of schools that you're looking at and want to go to. You can do that based on, so Edmit's site will give you an estimate of what you are likely to receive. If that number is really different, that might be a basis for an appeal, and we can work with you on that. Or you can do it, based on other research that you do and kind of what you believe your eligibility should be. And so I think the last step, I think, in the process is to look at not just the price, but the employment outcomes for the school. So this is something we haven't really talked about yet, but school, if you go by the investment metaphor, it's not just about finding the cheapest school. It's actually about finding the school that's going to help you kind of pay back that that investment that you made. And schools can look really different in terms of employment opportunities that they have, whether it's geography or the majors that they're offering or the services and career resources that they have on campus. Those outcomes can actually look very different school to school. And so a school that might be slightly more expensive, but have, that better brand and better career services may well be worth the money and may well be worth a little bit extra in debt even. And so this is something that Edmit has also is employment outcomes. And that's data that the government has started collecting. It's data that's available in other places as well that we use. And so I'd urge people to think kind of long term beyond just the price as well in thinking about the offers.
Right. While it's 4 or 5 years, it is not, hyperbolic to say this is an investment for the rest of your life. You may change careers or jobs many times over, but this is the launching point, the foundation for you to get paid a salary that is comparative to your education. So it is an investment to go forward with. We've had a few questions here, and I want to make sure we get to them, but also want to recognize this may not be your area of expertise around. Do you have resources at Edmit, or do you know of them where first generation, female, minority status, those things influence, even if there's not a need based, influence how scholarships may be awarded?
Yeah, certainly. And that does again kind of vary school by school. So that's something that you can do in your research. Often schools will have like a specific section of their site for financial aid, and they might have scholarships that are dedicated to specific categories of applicants. Or you can look at whether they award merit money, and kind of you can look at the demographics of the school to see if you would be bringing kind of some diversity to the table. So the answer is yes, that those things can all impact your package. It's just going to be a little bit different school to school, and also sometimes depend on the pool of applicants that they're receiving, right?
Sure.
Because if they get a lot of other people that look like you, it might not be as strong of a selling point.
And that's typical of this information you're talking about, that it's just harder to find because it is so dispersed across multiple schools' websites, right?
Yeah, exactly. And schools won't usually kind of commit to that ahead of time, which is why, any information you can get about other people that are like you that kind of have gone through the process is really useful. And that often comes in the form of like forums or, your college counselor. We try to consolidate some of that information and Edmit too, so that we're, learning from the community.
We are coming up on time. Amazing how quickly an hour can go, but do want to acknowledge the crowd has been awesome. You guys have been asking some great questions. We've got to some of them. Some of them we will not get to during this hour. Again, if there are questions that Edmit can answer, Sabrina or somebody from her team will be in touch. Of course, you can find them, and we're going to share information momentarily about how to sign up for Edmit and where you need to find out that. But you can also find Kaplan Test Prep, obviously, captest.com. Any information we've had, Ashley and Nicole have been doing a great job in chat, sharing those links with you as well. So happy to continue getting those questions coming in, but do want to acknowledge we're coming close to the end. So we may get to one or two more before we go. But it's been a great night here, and appreciate everybody being so interactive with us as we go through. Let's get to this one, then we'll do the contact information. Is early action something colleges like and would lean towards accepting the student? And I'll go a step further, and providing more aid for? Is that something that influences, would a college perhaps give a little bit more to get one of those higher level students who are applying early into the fold?
Yes. So I think the way to think about financial aid, and again, this so schools that really focus their dollars only on financial need, this is a little bit less true of, because for those schools, you just have a formula and it's based on your financial situation, and it's very difficult to move that formula once it's set. And this is a small number of schools, but it's kind of, the kind of brand name schools that some of you might be considering, like the Ivy League schools and other very selective institutions. they play with their money less because they don't have to compete for students. They're kind of in the powerful seat. But schools generally, other than those, schools are trying to attract the best applicants, and they're doing that with all the resources they have at their disposal, whether it's marketing, branding, again, support that they offer, and financial aid is a part of that. So something like early action is it's a way that you're kind of signaling your interest in the school and signaling your commitment to it. And so that's positive from the standpoint of financial aid, because you know they know that you're really interested. So I think a lot of times that's not as clear to schools, and that's why they might, not give such a generous package. That said, if it's a situation where you're committing to the school ahead of time, then just keep in mind that you won't be able to negotiate or appeal once you have committed to the school. And so there's a little bit of a negotiation tactic there too, where if you have more options, you will also be able to kind of open the door to a financial aid appeal.
Fantastic. Appreciate the response. Let's share some of the information of how people can find Edmit and sign up for your site. Sabrina does have a slide here for that discussion. So if you want to go through it, Sabrina, would love to have people be able to leave here with actionable items.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see just some screenshots on the right of the kind of dashboards and the tools that we have that kind of help you figure out what's going to be affordable and like what colleges are a good financial fit, as well as kind of some other academic fit scores that we have that help you as you're building your list, and then also as you're figuring out how you're going to pay for college. And it's free to register. You just go to sign up, and it takes very little information to get started. And we'd love to work with you. We also have kind of an upgraded premium membership where you can have access to a network of experts that work with you and kind of answer your questions and help you make sense of the data. So, and it's quite affordable compared to like some of those very expensive college counselors that are out there. So I'd urge you to come and sign up, and I'd be happy to field questions specifically from this audience as well. Thanks so much for your engagement. My email address is on the next slide. And it's just sabrina@edmit.me. And you can see there also our Twitter and Facebook. We post articles and kind of blog posts all the time about tips for paying for college, kind of stories and case studies of how different people have made it work, resources for, like we've talked about, kind of starting conversations and mapping out different aspects of the college process. So we'd love to have you follow us along and then register at edmit.me.
For those of you who don't know, here is Kaplan's information. You can take that down, take it with you, but do want to highlight Sabrina's there. Sabrina, as I just go to our Instagram and share that for social media and obviously those who want to follow there and stop the screen share, to ask you this question about Admit Me. How old is your company? You keep talking about all this data that you're adding and that you guys are continuing to grow. How long have you guys been around, and what's sort of the next phase for you in data building and sort of making this a more accessible platform?
Yeah, that's thanks. So we're actually just about a little under a year old. So we're a pretty young company. I was working at a university. My co-founder, Nick Dukoff, was also he was a VP at Northeastern University. And so we both left those jobs to start the company. We were really passionate about just seeing how many students were coming in the doors to our colleges and kind of wondering about how much they were going to pay and what they were going to get at the end of it. And it was really hard for our universities to answer those questions for students in a way that was effective. So that's why we started Edmit. And we are working all the time to make our data better, to make the tools that we have better. So we'd love feedback from anyone on the call about that. And we're going to be expanding into 2-year colleges, grad school, other areas that kind of expand our purview. So we'd love to hear from all of you about what would be useful as well.
Sabrina Manville, co-founder of Edmit.me. That is their website. Edmit is the company name. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Really appreciate the time you took tonight. For those of you who didn't get to see it all live, you can go back and watch it at this very link. We will post it. You also get an email about it to follow up. Make sure you follow Kaplan Test Prep on all those social media channels and visit kaptest.com for any of your pre-college, SAT, ACT needs. Check out admitme.me, I should say, for your needs in getting your college aid all in line. Again, Sabrina, thanks so much for the time tonight. Appreciate it, and hope our audience got the best out of it. With that said, we have tons of information here on our YouTube channel. Go forth and learn, and we will see you next time here on our Kaplan Test Prep pre-college stream.